Lawyers of Reddit, what was the most disturbing case you were faced with? Before I became an attorney, actually, I'm from a pretty small town. Through a connection of my parents, I was able to shadow the district attorney for a summer during college. I expected to be going to an awful lot of DUI, statutory rape, and burglary trials, since that's most of what showed up on the police blotter. The night before I was to start, I went to bed very early. What can I say? I was excited. My parents were off on vacation, and I was just home with my big brother. After I had been asleep for a short time, my brother came into my room. "The phone is for you. It's the police." "Hi ho V, it's the district attorney. I know you're not starting with us until tomorrow, but how would you like to get started tonight? Wear jeans and boots, if you have them." I didn't even really say anything to my brother. I just got changed quickly and went to the police station. Turns out, a woman in town had set her home on fire with her 2 children inside, killing both of them. I was up all night with the dad during the initial investigation. He took me to the home. I had to climb up a ladder and onto the roof to get into the girl's bedroom. They shared a room, but had separate beds. I was told by the police that, when they found them, both were in the same bed, meaning they were awake when the house was on fire, and crawled into bed together, terrified. The neighbor was a police officer. He saw that the house was on fire, ran over to try and help, and was told by the mother that the kids were still inside. He couldn't get in to save them, and was just devastated. The rest of the day is a blur, an exhausting and traumatizing blur. I went to the autopsies. I got dizzy and had to leave the room. Honestly, the case was so devastating that I tried to wipe it out and didn't follow it much once I went back to college. A quick search tells me that the mom pleaded out to avoid the death penalty, which I knew the dad was going to fight for. She'll be in prison for the rest of her life. Well, I didn't expect my first Reddit post to be so serious. TL. Doctor, woman set her house on fire to kill her 2 small children. I do employment law for Uncle Sam. So many messed up stories. Woman brought a tape recorder on a date with a coworker. Taped her entirely consensual sexual encounter with coworker. Tried to use tape as evidence of sexual harassment. She was partly successful. The coworker was transferred, and she got some $sign to go away. Federal cop claims he was fired in retaliation for whistleblowing about misuse of a government vehicle. All his co-workers claim it was because he had took out his gun and pointed it at the phone when angry with the person on other line. Cop claims that they all made up this story to cover for someone else misusing the vehicle. A woman repeatedly slapped her co-worker with a ruler while he was on a conference call with his boss. She was angry because he had joked that she was late, even though everyone knows she's first in the office. They were non-law enforcement, but their boss was an special agent in charge and he refused to officially discipline her because she might challenge it. SACs typically spend their days throwing violent criminal gangs into prison, but he feared an admin person with a ruler. Law enforcement supervisor appears drunk on job and often acts strangely. Subordinate officer gets into his office, reads his medical records detailing a struggle with depression and antidepressant medication, and photocopies these notes to show his supervisor. She can't understand why she is not considered a whistleblower. Government scientist is angry that a coworker wears too much perfume. Discovers perfume lady has a phobia of fish. Chases a screaming cursing perfumed lady around office with dried fish. Assault charges filed by both parties. Federal judge very upset at time wasted in fish perfume dispute. Well, there's nothing here, so I'll go. A federal judge called up a senior associate at my firm a few years ago and asked us to take on a case for a pro-se plaintiff, i.e., a guy representing himself. The judge's personal rule, and it's a good one, is that if a pro-se plaintiff gets past summary judgment, he finds them pro bono attorneys. Getting past summary judgment, long story short, means the facts have been disclosed, and there's at least a question of who's right. We took the case by applying the time-honored principle of don't turn down a federal judge when he asks a favor, idiot. The guy was the plaintiff. He was suing some cops, the town, and the county. Our client had led the cops on a high-speed chase through a fairly dense town. and he went to jail for like 6 to 10 years for it. I forget now. What he was suing for, though, was that the cops used excessive force on him when he was arrested. No matter the crime, once the cops have you controlled, they can't just start kicking the shit out of you when you're in handcuffs. So, not a sympathetic case, but you get used to this. Your goal is just to make sure they get everything the law entitles them to. Then at our first interview, 2 disturbing factors came up. When going through his life history, he mentions that one day in his youth, he was on drugs and kicked out of his class at college. Pissed off, he goes into the parking lot, finds a girl standing by her car, and rapes her. Yep, our client is a rapist. He spent 10 years in jail for that. Now, obviously, rapists can be unfairly treated 15 years later, and everyone deserves equal protection under the law. But yeah, it's a lot harder to get emotionally involved in support of your client when he mentions that, too. More specifically to this case, if you're a cynic you might have asked, was he drunk driving? That night he decided to lead the cops on a car chase. So I asked, and he said, well, I had one drink at 8 PM, but this was at 2 AM, so honestly, it had to have been out of my system. Great. Then the summer intern said, were you on anything else at the time? Oh, I had done some coke and heroin that night. Jesus dude. You didn't feel like volunteering that earlier when we asked about the alcohol? But more to the point, if he was on all these drugs, how well does he remember all these beatings from years before? He didn't have any other witnesses who would speak on his behalf. Anyway, we got him a nice settlement, probably nicer than he deserved, and forgot about him. I looked him up a year or 2 later, and he was on the state's most wanted list. I don't even want to know. Having to call a 9-year-old as a witness to testify about how her father molested her when she was 7. We did so much prep with the child, social workers, her mom, etc. I had DVDs of forensic interviews where she made a full admission. She was ready to put it all out there about how her father touched her vagina and made her masturbate him, how semen came out of his penis, etc. I get her on the stand. She denies everything. I rephrase the questions as much as I possibly can. Still nothing. Shithead father is smiling at counsel table the whole time. We lost. Maybe the guy didn't do it. I'll never know. That was a tough day. This happened when I was working in a firm many moons ago. A group of our clients were suing their landlord because he went into their apartment, changed the locks, and evicted them for no reason, then proceeded to steal most of their stuff. Then the landlord had his goons dump the rest of their stuff on the street. He then sued them for eviction and perjured himself in court about damage done to the property and the amount of rent they owed. He also never served them when he filed the complaints because he somehow finagled it so that he could use a friend as a process server. The friend would lie about serving them. The end result was that he got massive default judgments against these people and got to keep a bunch of their shit. When we searched through the court records we found that he had filed at least 100 lawsuits like this since the early 90s. It was literally the most enraging thing I've ever encountered. These people lost everything. First case I ever tried went like this. A 48-year-old man had gone to a drinking in the woods party with a bunch of teenagers. After some hearty drinking, he spots a 12-year-old passed out because she had drunk a 750 of Bacardi, so he pisses on her face. For a long while. How long? Well, before going to the party, he had had a little to drink. How much? Oh, just a few beers. How many? Oh, maybe 30. Such was his testimony, which was delivered while he wore a muscle t-shirt with a skull on it and the text "Bonehead. You can't make this stuff up." He went to prison. There is a federal law, VOA, that makes it illegal to evict a person from public housing for being a domestic violence survivor. Yes, you read that right. The law says that you can't evict someone because e.g. an ex shows up and beats them. My first reaction, why would you ever need a law like that? What kind of monster would evict someone because they'd been a victim of a crime? Then I got a case that showed me that, oh yes, this does happen. It really brought home the point that sexism often takes the form of paternalism and stereotyping rather than outright dislike, e.g. by framing women as natural victims who have only themselves to blame if they get beat up or raped. The housing authority staff kept going on about how this was all for the person's own good and how she was just trouble because she let men take advantage of her and she needed to learn to respect herself. And then of course this guy would stop beating her up and so on. So they decided to throw her and her kids out on the street. The guy didn't even live with her. Not that it should matter. Law provides for e.g. evicting the abuser, but not the other people in the household. Real eye-opener. Deeply disturbing. A related domestic violence case that also shocked me. A domestic violence survivor escaped to a convenience store and called the police. They made fun of her because, hey, what's the big deal? You escaped, you're fine. It's not our job to take care of your boyfriend problems. Don't call us unless it's really serious, like if he's got a knife to your throat or something. As she put it, if it gets really serious, he might kill me before I can call for help. I was appalled to hear that police officers had blown her off like that. Shortly after I started practicing, I was asked to assist a partner with a case involving a man killed in a bar fight. We were representing the bar owner in a lawsuit brought by the decedent's family. The bar in question is an upscale brew pub in a nice part of town. It's not the kind of place where fights break out. The guy who was killed went out that evening with some friends and his sister. They bar hopped for a while and ended up at our client's place. That night there was a big group of fraternity guys out celebrating someone's 21st birthday, so they were all loud and quite drunk. One of the guy's friends got into it with one of the fraternity guys, and then all hell broke loose. This bar only serves draft beer, so glasses started flying everywhere in the fight and most people hid under tables or behind the bar. The guy tried to pull his friend out of the fight and get the hell out of there, but somewhere in the chaos the guy had his throat cut. This didn't look like a little cut from some flying glass. It looked like someone attacked him with a knife. I can still picture the autopsy photos. He wound up dying in front of the bar with his sister right there. She was truly heartbroken over the whole thing, and the guy who died had a young son too. Aside from the autopsy photos and the devastated family, the truly disturbing thing about the case is that everyone knows who the killer is, but there was never enough evidence to prosecute him. We hired a private investigator who interviewed a bunch of the fraternity guys and their friends. It turns out everyone who was there had a damn good idea who cut this guy, but no one actually saw him do it. Supposedly the fraternity brothers got together that night and swore they would never talk about it, but it was the worst kept secret on campus. Our investigator was certain as to the killer's identity, and I imagine the police knew as well, but no one could prove it. It's frightening that someone can just kill another human being in cold blood and get away with it. As for our client, it's tough to hold a bar owner liable for something like this. There are laws that hold bar owners liable if, for instance, they continue serving someone who is clearly drunk and allow that person to drive home and harm someone else on the way. The bar owner could also be held liable if the place is prone to violence and they don't take steps to prevent it. But in our case, none of that stuff really applied. We were able to get the case dismissed on summary judgment, and I think we wound up settling on appeal for a small amount. It was a victory for our client, but the whole thing just sucked. TL. Doctor represented a bar where an innocent guy got killed. Killer went free, bar wasn't liable for the death, and the guy's family is left to pick up the pieces. I'm not an attorney, but I graduated from law school. 1 year in college I worked for the Bexar County DA's office in Texas. My boss one day offered to let me go down to the courtroom and watch some cases. The first case I ever saw was a 60-year-old man with AIDS who had raped 2 12-year-old girls. He was ultimately convicted, but watching his sleazy fucking lawyer cross-examine the girls was the most painful thing I've ever watched. This piece of shit tried to make them say it was consensual and that they were lying to get money out of him. They were fucking 12. The judge was not happy with him